Okay, everybody. Welcome to the Norton Planning Board's meeting of Tuesday, July 25th, 2023. Again, this is a hybrid public meeting, so members of the public are welcome to participate in person or remotely. I'll go through ground rules in a second. In person, we are at the Norton Media Center, 184 West Main Street. There's also a Zoom link available to join the meeting digitally on the meeting agenda or through the Zoom meeting ID 638-929-1060. There's also a phone number should you wish to dial by phone directly. The meeting will also be available on Norton Cable Access. For future sessions, if you'd like to submit questions or comments to the board and are not able to attend, please email them to Brian Carmichael, town staff, whose email address is posted on the meeting agenda. For those of us attending remotely, we will have a point in the discussion if you wish to speak remotely to a specific agenda item. When you do so, or when you would like to do so, I would just ask if you can please try to use the reactions function within Zoom to raise your hand or make some other kind of note so I know that you are waiting to speak. I will ask you to come off mute and introduce yourselves for the record with your name and address. While we will be looking at the chat during the meeting, we will not be reading comments from the chat into the record. This is not Twitter or X or whatever it is now. So if you'd like to speak, just let us know and we will give you every opportunity to do so. Otherwise, I would ask anybody who's joining remotely to please mute your line while you're not speaking, just to avoid any echoes, etc., that may happen. All of us are figuring out, still working through Zoom, and we're expected to be experts instantly, and I know everybody works differently. So with that out of the way, I think I've talked for enough, about 3 minutes straight, so call the meeting to order. In terms of planning board business and policies, I do just want to make a note that we have just a couple more days to submit any comments to the town manager regarding the board member code of conduct. So if you have any additional comments, please send them over via Brian for them to be reviewed by town staff and town manager, etc.
So we send them to Brian?
Is that different than what we said last meeting?
It is.
We said just send it directly to Mike?
Yes.
Okay. Well,
I'm happy to do either, just tell me which.
you have a preference, Brian? Straight to Mike?
Send it straight to Mike.
Okay. Straight to Mike it is. One less thing for Brian to do, of which he has many. Okay. We do not have any bills or warrants or minutes to approve at this meeting, correct? Okay. Just confirming. Okay. So, with those items out of the way, we do have a public hearing to get to here. And this has a whole bunch of numbers here. So we have site plan reviews 20100, 20103, 20106, and special permits 19928, 19935, and 20107. In an earlier meeting, in a version of the agenda, a couple of the permit numbers were incorrectly typed. But again, these are all of the site plan reviews and special permits related to 0 Mansfield Avenue with the applicant Pisarn Home Builders LLC, and they're looking to build 3 apartment buildings on the property. So what we'll do here is I'll ask the applicant to come up and give a presentation and an overview of what they're looking to do. The board may ask some questions, have some comments about the proposal, and then we'll open it up for public comment after that time. Okay? So with that out of the way, I'll ask applicant to just introduce themselves and give an overview of the project and what you're looking to do.
Good evening. My name is Jack Jacoby. I'm an attorney with offices at 144 Bank Street in Attleboro. My firm is Cook & Smith. Our engineer is Dan Campbell from Level Design. Nick Reuter from Pisarn is here also. And we are here to present the opening presentation of a project. If you remember, about 2 weeks ago, you approved a Form A plan, which divided this property so that we have 3 lots that we're proposing. They are known as C, D, and E. show you a portion of the property that we're not touching at all. That's in the upper left corner as you're looking at things. The lots, forgive me, I've taken my glasses off, but Lot C is 1.735 acres. It has upland of over 69,000 square feet. Lot D is 100,135 square feet, which is 2.299 acres. The upland is 65,334, and the lot E is 3.986 acres with upland of 113,906. We are proposing to put a 24-unit apartment building on each one of the lots. The building of that would require site plan review from you. It requires a special permit because it's multifamily housing in the Village Commercial District, and it's also in the Water Resource Protection District, so that also requires a special permit from you in order to build any of those. In addition to this, we will be in front of the Conservation Commission on the 14th of August. And we will be applying for wetlands permits from them because there are wetlands on the site. And of course, there's stormwater to be dealt with and always traffic. We are going to have by Zoom a representative from our traffic engineering firm, Vanessa & Associates, who will explain to you the traffic study. This was called and advertised as one project, but it actually technically is 3 projects, and that's why you'll see there's 3 numbers. And my understanding is that your bylaw doesn't allow for multiple buildings on one lot, so we had to create 3 lots. The alternative would have been to have one very long 72-unit building, which we did not think was appropriate for the area. We did not think was appropriate for the business model either. It just doesn't work to do it that way. So having 3 smaller buildings made much more sense to us. All of the lots and the buildings on them meet all of the dimensional density and parking requirements for each one of them. That is basically what we're proposing. As I said, each one is a 3-story building. Each one has 24 units in it. The appropriate number of parking spaces. There are some garage features as well. I think it would be more important than me prattling on for you to hear from Dan Campbell, who is our engineer of local design, who can take you around the site. He can describe the topographic features, the buildings, and the parking, and the drainage, and the landscaping, and the lighting, and all of the other things that are extremely important to making any decision like this. Dan?
That was quite a list. I'm just going to take a second before you get going and make sure that everybody who's joining us remotely was able to hear. If somebody can give a thumbs up or a yes, it was good in the chat, let us know. If it was not good and it was a little bit too quiet, we can, yep, I did a yes, so we were good. So you can keep going at the same level without a...
Perfect. I'm louder than Jack is to begin with, so hopefully I got this.
Okay.
So good evening, Daniel Campbell, Level Design Group, Plainville, Mass, on behalf of the applicant. What we have, as detailed, is 3 separate projects that really encompass one development scenario throughout the area. We have 3 buildings, same size, same style on each, Lot C, Lot D, and I will get to Lot E in a minute. Each one of the developments, we follow the required setbacks to multifamily housing. We have some amenity garages on sites, the handicap access, and we have maintenance trash buildings on each one of the properties as well. Sidewalks throughout, and as a benefit to the development and the surrounding area, we're also planning a sidewalk in accordance with the traffic analysis along Mansfield to the corner of Reservoir, which is a location for the school buses. Someplace, if there are kids in the development, to be able to be picked up by the school bus. Each of the buildings is currently proposed to be serviced by sewer down Reservoir Ave, which we will get to in a minute. The layouts are as you see here, and I can show grading as well. But the stormwater basins are in the back of each one of the facilities, discharging to the wetlands. The wetlands is central. The wetlands then drains to the north towards the reservoir as well. We will be going through stormwater. They've started their peer review. We postponed conservation in reference to a review of the wetlands line with the conservation agent, and hoping Frank is back on water and sewer sometime soon, so we can also have that discussion with him. On lot E, we have the same building, similar parking lot setup, garages, stormwater basin in the front and in the rear, capturing the flow across property. We are not planning on disturbing anything along the corner of the property or the rear. Our closest point in accordance with zoning is 21 feet. We're planning a 6-foot opaque fence all along Reservoir to block the abutting properties. Discussions on the abutting properties and the associated landscaping. We are looking to landscape Lot E along the rear of the building, the sides of the building, to blend in with the native wooded area along Reservoir, leaving the wooded area where we can, with only this portion being a cleared area for the grading associated with the pond. Extensive grading in the front of the structure and grading in the bioretention basin towards the front of the property between the two properties, and then Lot C and Lot D are going to be very similar, just flipped on their landscaping. Landscaping on the sides, open lawn area for the development as a whole, and landscaping along Mansfield Ave. Concern development, the buildings that are being proposed are similar in style to the building that's on the first page, and the landscaping is similar to the buildings on the following pages, which is a development in Plainville.
And just to confirm, were these in the files that we had to review? I don't recall seeing
These are not. These were taken today on sunny day before the rain started. Just wanted to provide them.
Okay.
Would you like us to submit those electronically tomorrow?
That would be great.
Okay.
Alternatively, I can just scan them in tomorrow.
I'm sure they have a digital file, so it'd save you 5 minutes at the scanner.
After I'm done prattling on, when the traffic engineer is doing his work, I can email him to Brian. So we'll have him tonight.
And if you don't mind, if you don't have an extra one,
I do have an extra one.
if you could just pass that around the room
Absolutely.
here, just so people can see it as a representative example, not necessarily exactly, but just as a representative example of what you're talking about. Because I mean, we did look at the plans, we have rectangles, and this is obviously helpful detail.
So, 3-story structure. To meet with the size and height requirements, it's going to be a structure similar to what's on the first page. Second and third pages are a little bit taller buildings. So, though the style is very similar, the buildings and the roof lines are a little bit different. We have 3 connections along Mansfield Ave, no connections on Reservoir Road for any of the developments, for any of the proposed properties. Lot E itself has 2 driveways for the development, and Lot C and D each have 1. We will have to go through Mass Highway as well. Wanted to come and talk to the planning board and conservation stormwater before we started through that process.
Okay.
I'm happy to answer any questions from an engineering standpoint. You know, it's a lot to begin with, and if there aren't any, we can have Van Ness, Dan, La Savita make a presentation on traffic.
Sure.
Can I ask you a question?
We'll have time for public comment in a minute,
Okay.
but
Sorry.
no worries. I want to make sure that if I don't come back to you, please make sure I can't ignore you. Okay. Obviously, I think we're going to have questions on the engineering side. I think one of those probably would be traffic. So unless anybody has an objection, I'm inclined to have their traffic engineer present, knowing that that's going to be peer reviewed as well. Yeah. So if we have the traffic consultant here to present, I see you've come on camera here. So if you can just introduce yourself to the board and other people who are in the meeting, we'll go from there.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right. For the record, my name is Daniel Lasivita, a traffic engineer with Van Assen Associates. This is prepared to be the traffic consultants for the project. I'm just going to run you through a hopefully relatively brief review of traffic, and then I'll be here to answer any questions that the board may have. Just a general overview of our traffic study or our transportation impact assessment. It was prepared in consultation with the town of Norton as well as with MassDOT and was completed in accordance with MassDOT's guidelines. The project itself, it will not result in a significant impact or increase on motorist delays or vehicle queuing, with the peak hour traffic being less than one additional vehicle on the roadway per minute. I'll kind of get into all of these bullet points in more detail later. All movements that are proposed to exit the driveways onto Route 140 are predicted to operate with minimal delay and negligible vehicle queuing. We did not find that there were any apparent safety deficiencies at any of the intersections we looked at. And there are some trees and vegetation that once trimmed and removed from the sight lines of the driveways. The required safe lines of sight at each of the driveways will be provided. And the conclusion of the whole traffic study was essentially the project can be accommodated within the confines of the existing transportation infrastructure with the recommendations we had laid out. And now we'll get a little further into a little more technical. This is just a site location map. As you can see, and as you know, the project site itself lies in the fork of Route 140 and Reservoir Street, up north of 123 and of Wheaton College. This slide shows a top-down of the study area that we looked at and some of the existing conditions. We looked at 3 intersections in total. We looked at the unsignalized intersection of Mansfield Ave, Route 140 at Reservoir Street, as well as the 2 signalized intersections of Route 123 at Route 140, 123 at Mansfield Ave, as well as Taunton Ave. We also conducted counts on Route 140 in the vicinity of the project site. All counts that we used in this assessment were conducted in March of this year, March of 2023, and were conducted while schools, including Wheaton College, were in regular session. So any additional traffic that might be generated by the college would be accounted for within these traffic volumes. Per MassDOT's guidelines, we adjusted, or in this case, didn't adjust those traffic volumes to the seasonal average. We found that March was about 5% above average conditions. So in order to provide a conservative assessment from which to analyze the impacts of the project, we did not adjust those volumes down. So we are looking at slightly above average conditions. With that in mind, Route 140 in the vicinity of the project carries a little over 10,000 vehicles per day, 10,500 to be more specific, with about 750 to 850 vehicles per hour during the commuter peak hours, which is your peak hour between 7 and 9 a.m. and 4 to 6 p.m. Peak hour meaning when the road carries the most vehicles. And as I kind of said in the brief introduction, we didn't identify any safety deficiencies at any of these 3 intersections or in the vicinity of the project site where the driveways are going to go in. None of the intersections had an above average crash rate. They weren't identified by MassDOT as high crash locations. Nothing like that.
Now, just
This next page
So
shows
just
the trip generation summary for the project. We looked at data published by the ITE, or the Institute of Transportation Engineers, which takes various studies from all across the country. In this case, we looked at multifamily housing, as that is what the project is going to entail. And we found that on an average weekday, the project is going to generate 538 vehicle trips over the course of a whole day. And those are one-way trips, so a vehicle exiting in the morning for work and coming back in the evening counts as 2 trips. So it's essentially 269 vehicles entering and exiting the site. And during the peak hours that I talked about, we anticipated 45 vehicles during the weekday morning and 52 during the weekday evening, which in the grand scheme of things, if we look at those numbers, they really come out to less than 1 new vehicle on the roadway per minute during those peak hours, which isn't, especially on a roadway that carries over 10,000 vehicles a day, like 140, that is not an increase in level of motor vehicles that you would expect to be able to see driving on the roadway. We then took the trips we estimated to be generated by the project and dispersed them to the distribution you see here. I know some of the numbers are kind of small, but the main takeaway is that about 50% of traffic we expect to travel northwest on Route 140 and about a quarter northeast on 123, going towards 495 in both of those cases, which is where we would expect a majority of commuter traffic to go if it's traveling outside of Norton. To generate this trip dispersal, or the distribution pattern, we looked at U.S. Census data for residents of Norton, looking at the nearby municipalities where they work, and then created a model based off of that to come up with these percentages. One of the last parts of our traffic study was we ran a traffic operations analysis at the 3 intersections we looked at, as well as the 4 driveway locations. And we did find that at the 2 Route 123 intersections, there are existing capacity issues, which are characterized by extended delays or extensive vehicle queuing. But as a part of the project, as a form of mitigation to not only offset the predicted impacts of the project, but as well as to try to help the town and its residents fix an existing issue, the project component will implement a optimal traffic signal and timing plan at those 2 intersections, which based on our analysis will improve conditions such that they are better than they operate currently in a lot of cases, and in cases where they're not, they will operate better than they are predicted to in the future without the construction of the project and without that mitigation. And then just the last bit was recommendations for both site access as well as the offsite mitigation, which I just talked about. They were all relatively standard, talking about driveway widths, vehicles exiting the project section placed under stop control. Dan Campbell had talked about earlier putting the sidewalk along 140 and down by Reservoir Ave, where the bus stop will be. I did mention earlier there are trees and vegetations that are on the site now that will be removed once the project goes in and the land is cleared to provide sufficient sightlines. And then lastly, it was just the off-site mitigation at those 2 intersections, the optimal traffic signal timing and phasing plan. And with that, I hope that wasn't too long and nobody fell asleep while I was talking, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Okay. I know I have a couple of questions. If you don't mind, I'll lead off here a little bit. If you can keep your presentation up, there are a couple of
Yep,
notes that
of
I
course.
wanted to just ask. First, I think you mentioned in the review that the intersection and center, you didn't note them as having deficiencies. Can you just clarify that? I'm sure it's a traffic engineer criteria that you're looking at. I would characterize those intersections as having many deficiencies personally, but just to make sure that I understand the criteria there.
So you are 100% correct that it is a traffic engineering threshold, essentially, that calls out a deficiency. And in this case, we look at the level of service, which is you can kind of think of them like school grades. They're level of service A to level of service F, obviously with A being the best and F being the worst. And traffic engineers define level service E as a roadway or intersection that is at capacity, and a level service F is an intersection or roadway that is over capacity. And those are defined by the average motorist delay at that intersection. So there were multiple movements as well as the overall intersection itself that are operating at or over capacity. In this case, level service E is defined as an average motorist delay greater than 55 seconds, and level service F is greater than 80 seconds. So there are, like you had said, there are multiple such deficiencies at these intersections with specific movements on 123 and on both of the 140 approaches that qualify as both at or over capacity.
And you mentioned mitigation with signaling. You're talking about the existing signals that exist, correct?
Correct. So these signals are actually relatively unique where they're close enough. They're under one controller. One controller talks to both and controls the greens, reds, and yellows for each. And based on our analysis, just tweaking the timing and the phasing, we managed to get all movements except for one, that being the Route 140 southbound movement at the Mansfield Ave intersection down to level service D or better. That one movement was still at level service E, but everything else was level service D or better, which traffic engineers define as acceptable traffic conditions.
So is that essentially these are adjustments that, I'm going to be a cynic here. I apologize that Mass DOT hasn't come up with yet. Is this? I mean, this intersection's been a problem for decades, so I'm surprised. Like, not to take away from the larger point of the presentation about the traffic analysis, but like proposing kind of the we can just tweak the signals and these intersections will be fixed is.
I understand where you're coming from. Maybe my wording was a little out there saying just tweak them. It isn't necessarily as simple as I'm perhaps making it seem, but it is not to say MassDOT hasn't come up with something like this before, but travel patterns change over time, especially when we're looking at something like COVID and the repercussions of COVID, where you see more vehicles taking a certain turn or not, and it's not necessarily saying that MassDOT hasn't come up with something like this before. They just recently.
Okay.
If I can add a little bit, we've had this conversation with Van Ness a little in the past. One of the things about traffic signals is people's patterns change every couple of years. MassDOT reviews these intersections every 10, 15, 20 years. So when a project comes along, and as Daniel alluded to, that we are not changing the traffic pattern. However, there are ways to make the traffic pattern better, and that's the direction we're going. Since we've gone and done this study of that entire intersection, as an implementation and a betterment as part of our special permits, there's no reason not to do it. And traffic signals themselves, if we could evaluate them every year, would probably change on a yearly basis.
Yeah, no, I think the town has looked at a number of varying plans to approach that center. intensive in a variety of ways in terms of, does the town look at taking land to straighten that intersection out? Obviously, any improvement is helpful. And if there are findings that can be shared with the town and Mass DOT, I'm sure that nobody's going to turn away free engineering. So,
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, Mass DOT has hundreds of thousands of intersections all across the Commonwealth. They simply do not have the capacity to look at these very often. They look at them generally when there's a major upgrade, but what they do is they piggyback on private development. So when a private developer needs to put a project in, the developer does the study, the developer pays for the upgrades, and that's the way Mass DOT works until there's a major reconstruction of this intersection. So the fact that Mass DOT may have looked at this a decade ago or more, they take advantage of the fact that developers need to address traffic.
And when we make our application to DOT for our access permit, it is one of the things they're going to ask us, is there a way to improve in the area? This is that. And as Attorney Jacoby said, they piggyback on those recommendations, and we're able to do these changes.
And then they make us pay for the reprogramming of the controllers.
Yes.
but other than the reprogramming, this is not buy a physical capital equipment.
Correct.
This is an adjustment to the programming.
Yes.
Period. Okay.
Correct.
And the other thing that happens over time, even if traffic patterns change, controllers are machines, and they, the clock in my kitchen was 10 minutes slow this morning, and so those things happen over time. And so over time, the controllers lose a little bit of their efficiency as machines, and they lose a few seconds here and there, and that can cause bigger problems.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for the clarification, everybody. Okay. And the other item I was just going to call out on the traffic study, can you just go to the breakdown of trips going into the peak weekday? You hit a table, I think. Yeah, that one. So just to confirm that we are saying that on an average weekday morning peak hour, we have 34 vehicles leaving the site on a proposed 72-unit project. Is that correct?
That is one of the most common questions we get as traffic engineers. Most of the time not worded as nicely and as tactfully as you just said, so I appreciate that. And my response to that is we are just analyzing the worst of the worst conditions, not only along the roadway, but also within the project site. Because if the roadway signals operate under the worst conditions, then they operate under anything better than that. So we look at the peak hour generated by the project. So that is not to say there's only 34 vehicle trips leaving during the morning. That is during the peak hour. So in this case, it might be, and I forget exactly what the peak hour of the roadway was, but just say it was 7 to 8 a.m., 34 vehicles leave the project site during that hour, then up to 33 vehicles could leave during the 8 to 9 a.m. So it isn't necessarily saying that these are the only vehicles that are leaving during the morning or the evening. This is just the peak hour of the project, which we apply to the peak hour of the roadway to get a conservative and a worst case scenario from which to assess and to do our analysis from.
And those are just based on traffic engineering calculations from across the country, and all that data is blended together and you take the result, correct?
Correct, yes. These are based on studies of existing in this case, multifamily housing developments. And then we just apply the dependent variable of the number of units and then get the average number
Okay.
from that.
And if I may also suggest that if you're catching the 6:45 train at the Attleboro station, you're going to leave your house at 6:20 in the morning. If you are catching an 8:30 train to Boston, you're leaving at a different time, going out of the Mansfield station. And more people are working at home. God knows my daughter is supposed to go in 1 day a week, and she's been in 4 times this calendar year. So there is a lot more remote working that's taking place these days. There used to be a stigma before COVID, right? People found out that you actually can work from home and work efficiently. So we're just focusing on one particular hour, and the concept is that is the worst hour, as he said. All the other hours are there.
Yeah. So, yeah. I would imagine that most people, if they're taking the commuter rail, would go to Mansfield since it's cheaper. But you never know.
Well, it depends on whether you want to get a seat or not.
True. Mansfield does fill up. Okay. So while we have the traffic engineer here, do we have any other specific traffic-focused questions at this point? Obviously, we may come back to some in the future, but while you're here and on camera, we can focus those and maybe come back to our questions on the larger engineering. Alan?
I've got one. Were you able to take into account any of the development that's going on up the street? There's a 40B project that's being built right now. There's another large warehouse.
Yep.
Each will be adding traffic. Is that taken into account in any way?
So we did reach out to the town planner, and they identified the Balfour Farm residential development. And then one of the words you probably heard me say a lot tonight has been conservative. We try to, everything we do as traffic engineers, we try to be conservative just if we plan for the worst. Anything better than that is a positive. So per MassDOT's guidelines, they require a 7-year projection into the future. So we went to the year 2030, and part of that projection is not only looking at specific developments within towns, looking at traffic studies conducted for those developments, or doing essentially what we did with the project is looking at data published by the ITE and applying those numbers. We also look at a general traffic growth rate in the area. In this case, and MassDOT has a whole bunch of count stations all over the state that are constantly counting vehicles every day. So we can look at the change in traffic over the past 10 years. And we found in this case there's a growth rate of about 1.5%. So that was compounded annually over those 7 years, as well as specific traffic volumes from the Balfour Farms development were used to generate that future assessment. So a long-winded answer is yes.
To confirm, the Balfour Farms is the project next to the shopping plaza and the McDonald's, et cetera, from a placemaking perspective. Right on 140. That's Pine Street, correct? So yeah, so we're using Pine Street. We're not evaluating the 40B on 140 with this project.
It was not specifically mentioned by the town, and I'm not 100% sure the size location of it. But
okay.
The reason that we apply that background growth rate is to take into account specific developments we're not aware of. We don't include things coming down the pipeline. So that is
Okay.
those developments could be within that background.
So that project has a roof on it and will be complete relatively soon. So I think that if there's a way for us to rectify that in terms of just understanding the size of the project and see if there's a way for us to account for that in the review, that might be helpful.
Yep, that is
so-
something that we certainly can do. I can reach back out. There were 2 developments that I believe you had mentioned. If you wouldn't mind just repeating the names of those again, just so I can make a quick note.
Balfour Farms is the one that you mentioned, which is on Pine Street.
Mhm.
There's a 40B there are actually 2 40B developments that have been proposed on 140. 40B projects don't become before this board, so I don't have details off the top of my head for you. Brian, I'm not sure if you have the files for those, or if you can find them.
As far as I know, only the McDonald's one is being built currently.
But it's still, if they're looking 7 years out, we should just give them both of them. And they can look at them and evaluate them. Yeah. But yeah, it's within it's within relatively short distance of the project site, and it's happening right now. So obviously that would be a significant amount of traffic that you're not accounting for. Not necessarily maybe in proportion to the overall traffic on 140, but just in terms of the overall landscape of multifamily traffic on that road.
Yes, indeed. That is something you could reach out to Brian after the meeting and get plans or more details on, and we can come back with an update.
Okay. Thank you, Alan, for starting that one.
As Alan mentioned, there's also the new warehouse across from that 40B. And then there's also the new senior center on Mansfield Avenue.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if you were able to hear that, but there is a new industrial building happening on 140, as well as the town's new community senior center, which is in relative close proximity to the project site as well. I obviously don't know everything that you did look at when you started this, but if we can just make sure that we're including all the pieces that we should be including.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. And I'm sure this is something that'll be in the peer review, but in terms of, I know you mentioned the sight lines were good, but might require some vegetation. I'm not sure how much you assume that people might not follow the speed limit on specific roads as it relates to the sight triangles, but I would assume that in this case, potentially.
So what we had looked at, because you're right, people don't always follow these speed limits. So in addition to those traffic counts we conducted on 140 speed measurements, were also a part of those. And the posted speed itself is 40 miles an hour on Route 140. We found that vehicles traveling southbound, the 85th percentile, with the speed at which 85% of vehicles are traveling at or below, was found to be 43 miles an hour. And we assessed sightlines based on 45, so a little further. Again, to be conservative. So that is something that you are correct that we should be aware of, and it's something that we looked at. The sightlines are met for 45, which is 5 above the posted speed limit, as well as a couple above the 85th percentile job speeds.
Okay, thank you. Anything else that we have in terms of traffic at this time? Okay.
I have a question,
Yeah.
if I can ask online.
Yep. If you don't mind holding for just a second,
Sure.
we're going to try and ask some other questions about the engineering of the project, then we'll open up for public comment. But I do see you, and I see your hand raised, so thank you very much. Okay. So as it relates to the overall engineering of the project, I guess from a general perspective, I know the bylaws don't give you a whole lot of nuance in terms of multifamily. They kind of say if you go over 2 or 3, and then it's pretty much not a whole lot of guidance after that. Kind of, was there a design perspective or a point of view that you took with, I know we have the kind of the images here, but in terms of how you decided on the size of the buildings, the height of the buildings?
So the height of the buildings is designed to be within the zoning height requirements, and the number of floors is associated with that. The number of units, that particular building is a workable model from the developer standpoint. We were able to fit a substantial amount of green space on each of the lots. As you can see, in between Lot C and Lot D, for instance, we have almost the same amount of green space between the two for an amenity for a complex, so to speak. We had originally designed this under the previous zoning, which required so many units based on so much square footage of overall land area. And we were able to come in with a substantial number of condominium units. We had a preliminary conversation November, I believe, of 2022, right around the time of the zoning change, the approval of the zoning change on the modification. And it was suggested at that time we evaluate our overall project. So rather than there were a substantial number of individual driveways, for instance, coming out onto Mansfield and Reservoir, that we consolidated into 3 major project sites.
And as you kind of have it situated now, you've essentially structured these buildings so everything goes onto Mansfield. All the landscaping essentially means you can't see it from Reservoir at all, basically.
So the way that Lot E is,
Other than that one little section.
you cannot see C and D from Reservoir. You are almost 350 feet from Reservoir across the wetlands, which will be area that's not cut. The no disturb zone is not disturbed in the scenario for C and D. So from Reservoir, there's at least 350 feet across of treed area. Lot E, we know that there's an area that we're cutting close to the road. The pavement is approximately 8 feet off of that. Anybody who drives down Reservoir knows that there's a lot of trees inside of the right-of-way near the pavement, especially in that area. But we do have a cut almost to the property line. To mitigate that, we are putting up the fence from this point in the treed area to this point in the treed area to try and mitigate that one section.
And can you just walk through the parking numbers for each structure or one representative structure?
Sure.
It's a 24-unit building, correct?
It is a 24-unit building. The design was done as if every unit is a 2-bedroom unit. The developer is here and able to answer questions, but that building specifically is about half 1-bedroom, half 2-bedroom units. So we designed it, again, speaking to Daniel's point, worst case scenario, to make sure we had parking for not only on-site, but also the potential for visitors, potential for maintenance staff, things of those nature. So we also have, as we stated, garages on property. So there are some spaces that could be rented as a garage as well. So on-site storage, that type of thing.
In terms of pure number per building, spots plus garage for, I think we danced around it, but just in terms.
Pure numbers per building, Lot E has 51 total, which is 49 standard to accessible, which would be more than adequate for the total number of units.
2 per unit plus 1?
It's 1.8, 1.7, I believe.
Not counting the accessibles?
Correct.
Okay. And roughly the same with the other units as well?
It is the same with the other units. The other unit is a larger parking lot as we've combined the driveways together for that unit as a whole. What we were trying to do was we were trying to provide green space that's usable space for the residents in between each one of the sets of units, and in between D and E, for instance, the green space is throughout here. In between C and D, it's in between the 2 structures. It's fairly level on each. We kept utilities out of that area, so it could be a usable space.
I know this isn't an engineering question, but since you're in front of me, maybe
Sure.
you can pass it off. Do we have specific units set aside as affordable units at this time?
I don't believe at this time.
Okay. I would have to check and see if that was a requirement for the bylaws or
It's
not.
mandatory,
It is.
10%.
Okay. Yeah, so we can confirm that, but just in terms of, I believe that is something that this board does need to approve.
Sure.
Is all of those checklist items that go into affordable housing falls under our purview. And I know that there are a number of those through the state requires X, Y, and Z, so, so I went through, I think, my checklist for most of these things. I know other board members probably have some questions at this point. Steve, do you want to start off a little bit here, since?
Where do I begin? Okay, so I tried to evaluate the project on all of its merits, and I tried to come up with the concept of it myself a little bit based on what I saw wrong with it in my view, or good about it in my view, judgment-wise. I'm from Norton my whole life. I've watched this property since I was a kid. I'm a little bit hesitant about any destruction on this lot at all, especially this prominent corner. In the entirety of Norton's history, nothing has ever been on this lot, ever. It's completely undisturbed. Successional growth, very, very thick leaves, moss-covered rocks everywhere. There's wildlife in abundance, and it's in the middle of a prominent wildlife corridor that is currently being petitioned in other regards of being decimated to a degree. My biggest problem with this is that front lot on the corner. If there's any way to mitigate that, would be fantastic. You didn't mention any affordable housing, which when I looked into it, and going back into the idea of it being a closer building in the front, if affordable housing was increased to 30%, you can reduce the density of the lots, and the planning board can allow, we don't have to follow the same setback rules or the lot size rules. The density can be increased up to 3 times. So we could allow those 3 buildings to be clustered together in an effort to not destroy that front lot. I reworked the plan from my imagination, I guess, kind of flipping the parking. Village Commercial requests that all the parking is behind buildings, and the buildings create the frontage as part of the aesthetic. If anybody's willing to see that version of it, but I'm not sure what I'm supposed to say necessarily, but I don't like the front lot.
So, the only one I'll address now is why the parking is adjacent to the road, and it's because of the wetlands in the rear. We wanted to mitigate up front. We wanted to treat discharge to a pond and then discharge to the wetlands. Whereas if you're in reverse, you have got the building up front and the parking out back. It's a faster discharge, but it's less time to get from point A to point B, so to speak.
Sure.
So there's that point of it. I certainly will take a look at it with the client, but that is why we designed it the way we did.
Whether or not the parking lot was flipped to the rear of the building, the overall concept of creating a cluster set of building instead of spanning it out is still available. The parking could be in front or in back in that concept. It would require 30% affordable housing units. That can be donated to the town to be part of the town's affordable housing. You could donate sections of land as part of that. So we could potentially handle that, or if you wanted to handle your own affordable housing, you could do that. If you did it under 72 units, one building could be 24 units of affordable housing and the other two wouldn't. If that became the town's, you guys wouldn't have to bother with the affordable housing at all. It would be our duty. That's only under the idea that we were going to approve this project at all. It's still, but that's.
Those are potential tools in the toolbox that they can look at.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if I could just address one point, it sounds like you have different concerns for this lot than these two. So just remember that these are 3 separate applications which will require 3 votes.
Sure.
And so let's
Yes.
make sure that the things that you like stand apart from things that you may not like.
I would like it to be taken into consideration for the fact that, from your perspective, if we were to deny one of your buildings, you would have less units. It would be economically of your concern to hear me out on getting more units. But if not, that's not a problem. We could judge only 2 buildings.
A large part of these hearings is listening and understanding and reading the room. So we appreciate the fact that you've shared your thoughts.
Sure.
This is going to be it's not going to be a quick process. There's a lot of peer reviews and other things, a lot of other hearings that need to occur. So we certainly will take into account the things that we're hearing tonight.
I have diagrams if you want me to send them to you, but that's up to
If you want
the room wants them.
If you can send them to Brian, and that way we can all look at them and have come with questions.
Sure. Do you want me to send it now or later?
At any point, we can, as Mr. Jacoby mentioned, we're going to be looking at this more than once. So I think that makes sense. Anybody else have questions for Mr. Campbell? Did I get
Yes.
that? Okay, my memory's still working.
I have a question, sorry, and it's
Please.
probably more directed towards you. When the bylaw refers to a commercial building, I'm interpreting that from a real estate perspective as a multifamily apartment building, as a commercial building? Are the bylaws referring to a commercial building as more of a retail or a warehouse?
In terms of which section?
Section 4.8, I think, is what you're referring to.
No, 6.1B.
Okay.
Within village commercial, multiple commercial and industrial buildings may be allowed on a single lot. It also requires you to reduce the percentage of the lot covered by the buildings to 33% from 50%.
And just to confirm, we're in chapter what?
6.1B.
Okay. Let me just, 6.1B, okay, right there. Right in the top, right in the beginning there.
So I'm interpreting an apartment building as a commercial building.
I would tend to view that as commercial, meaning office or business, not multifamily.
Okay.
Because
For
the
purposes
next,
of the bylaws.
for the purposes of the bylaws. Because the next section speaks to all residential uses that are permitted by right or by special permit, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
in my mind, that is implying a differentiation between residential and commercial uses.
That's helpful. In real estate, an apartment building is considered commercial.
Yes, it is. For transactional purposes, yeah, it is a lot. And the use tables are also broken out for residential uses and commercial industrial uses, so that's where I'm also.
Part of the problem is your bylaw does not contain a definition of commercial, which I looked at as recently as this morning, because section 4.8 also is a bit indistinct, and it talks about a commercial building that exceeds 10,000 square feet needing a special permit from you as well. We determined that that did not apply because this is a residential building as opposed to a commercial building. But the next time you update your bylaws, you might want to look at putting a few more definitions in.
The definition of a commercial building is not in our bylaws. That is, I'm not surprised. I also continually, and I guess this is my own fault, I continually say I'm going to update the bylaw to remove the required map scale on all of our permits in the bylaws, and I never have. So, yes, that is something that we should probably look to add, and thank you for pointing that out.
If I may, under the zoning, that 10,000 square foot thing, it refers to only what's listed in the commercial zoning, the uses table. That would be what's considered a commercial building.
And then if you also look at 4.8, it doesn't say 10,000 square feet total or 10,000 square foot footprint, because the footprints here are under 4,000 square feet. So, you know,
You
there's...
could stack it up high and try it.
Yes. So there are, let's put it this way, every time a project comes along, you read the language and you try to apply it, and there are always questions.
Yes. No, we had the communications tower, that was a fun one, where the bylaws were telling us that we had to watch out for a building falling 300 feet horizontally. Yes, this is, I'm not exaggerating.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because it classified everything in the facility as part of the structure, and the structure needed to have the fall radius. So,
You know, the drop zone, so...
yes.
Yeah.
So, yes, bylaws are not perfect. There's always room for improvement. Laura, did you have anything else that you wanted to ask at this point? I see Alan kind of leaning forward here.
I'm good. Somebody else can go. Thank you.
Can we talk about sewer?
Sure.
So we're going to be extending sewer main all the way from the site, all the way up to Elm Street.
Correct.
Crossing in front of 27, approximately, residences
On both sides of the street, correct.
total. Do you know the cost and connection fees and the time frame those residents are going to have?
To make a connection,
Correct.
that is still under discussion with the sewer department. The connection itself, as it's being made, the sewer department had asked originally for stubs as we passed by, but no immediate connections necessary for any individual property.
But there is a time frame tied to it.
There's a time frame when you're talking Title V. Internal sewer department would be in accordance with whatever permit we end up garnering from the sewer department.
But if you stub the line to each house, then the rest of it's on their property. So that would be their choice and their time.
This has come up multiple times.
Based on Norton's law, Norton's rules and regulations around the sewer,
Correct.
basically.
Right.
There's a
Right.
substantial fee that's involved for each residence to tie in. And there's a time frame, as we've been told in the past, that they must connect if the sewer passes their property.
I think it's 7.5 years.
7 years.
Okay, I understand what you're saying.
So in 8
Yeah.
years, it's gonna be mandatory for all those residents to tie into the sewer,
About 15 grand each, anyways.
or more.
And
And
that's,
they have to abandon their own, the costs are,
whatever's in their septic is lost, yeah.
that's a tough nut to bite.
But that's going from the project site toward the intersection, or where is that?
It's going the project site down Reservoir to the intersection with Elm. There are two pathways the sewer department was looking at. Both are within 100 feet of each other.
I'm just going by history of how they've approached
Sure.
everything before and our guidance that we've had before for other projects.
As I said, the unfortunate part is Frank has been out. He emailed me asking to meet right after we made the submission. He's been out practically since then. I was asked to reach back out to him tomorrow. So I will be able to better answer that question next time.
Okay, so again, the proposal is to go over to Reservoir with the sewer and then go up to Elm. and
Correct.
connect in there. Okay. Which I believe is the same area we were looked at to evaluate sewering for another project that we talked about
Correct.
in the past. Okay.
Just another couple little things. I could have missed it. Was there snow storage areas on the site plans? I might have missed them.
There are a few snow storage areas
Okay.
located on the site plans. We made sure to level out grass around each of the parking lots.
And then fire department, has fire department looked at everything?
Fire department has looked at it. They asked us one question. We did respond to it, but we have to follow up with fire department.
and we have hydrants, obviously.
We have hydrants directly in front on 140.
Yeah. And I assume the traffic peer review would look through whatever the turning radius is on the giant truck in the parking lots and all
Correct.
that stuff, so. Okay. Anybody else on the board have questions for the applicant at this time? I know we have members of the public here in person and on the Zoom meeting who may have questions. So I'll pause here for a second. We want to pause for a second and let anybody who's attending the meeting ask questions. We can do that. Wayne, Eric? Okay.
According to Maria's last memo, we're going to have electric vehicle hookup requirements on site.
My understanding is under the new smart code, which Norton has adopted, there will have to be a certain number of spaces set aside with electrical vehicle hookups. What those are, we have to determine still.
They're expensive.
But those haven't been cited yet, basically.
They haven't been cited yet, so that could be part of the discussion as well.
Okay. Okay.
I just wanted to note that we had separate landscape and lighting plans for lots C and D, but not E. I know you showed us them for E, but I don't think we have them in our packets.
I don't know why. They were submitted. I'm happy to resubmit. The next revision of the plans will make sure that they're included as well.
Thank you.
God knows I've missed pages on PDF attachments before
There were a
myself,
lot of
so.
attachments. So.
Yes.
That was landscaping and
Lighting.
lighting.
Okay. So at this point, I'll open up kind of for members of the public to comment here. If you'd like to ask questions, I'd ask that you please make those questions to the chair, myself. If I can answer it myself, I will. If I'm going to defer to the applicant and ask them for follow-up, I'll try to do that. What we're trying to avoid with that is we're not going to turn this into a cross-examination of anybody. Nobody is Tom Cruise or Jack Nicholson, so some people got the reference there. Okay. So I know we did have one person from the Zoom meeting who spoke up earlier, and you were looking to ask questions as well.
Oh, well, after that, there's quite a few questions.
Okay. So I'll take the
I don't
gentleman.
have to be first, there's other people.
Well, you were already asking, so you volunteered yourself if you'd like to. So,
Okay.
so I'll ask you to come forward and just state your name and address, and then I'll go to the Zoom meeting to Deirdre, and then I'll go back and forth as best I can. Okay?
Yes, to the board, my name's Duncan McGowan. I live at 60 Mansfield Ave, right across from the project. We talked a lot about the transportation there. The line of sight, you can take down the trees, but those poles line up pretty good right in the way of the line of sight. They also had mentioned a sidewalk on that side. That side of the road's never traveled. It's always the other side of 140. I noticed on the plans that there is very minimal detail on the other side of 140 as far as curb cuts, gas station, driveways, the produce barn. Just wondering why they didn't even go to the full 140 layout as far as detail with stone walls and everything. I realize Mass DOT is going to be involved and how they're going to be involved with everything there. That was one of them. I have quite a few questions. Well, we're all getting tired. As far as the engineering, I noticed the test pits were all at the edge down towards Reservoir and 140. There want retention ponds and everything, but I don't see any information on test pits in those areas for water recharge into the system. There are quite a bit of wets back there, and I have one area here that even shows a river, and I talked to an old timer and said there was a pond out back there that they used to skate on. So I'm wondering how detailed that's going to be with the rechargeable detention ponds and that. Now, it's going for a special permit. I was wondering on the allowable number of units per building, how is that calculated?
Our bylaws do not say anything about it.
Okay, because I got here, minimum lot area for zoning requirements, 18,000 square feet. But it goes up to 34,000 square feet because it's a multifamily, 3 units or more.
Yeah. There's not the bylaw doesn't have a sliding scale as it goes up beyond 3.
Okay.
So obviously, the more units you go, the more parking spaces you need, eventually you run out of space.
Thank you. At this point, I do know along that side, with the gas station, with the entrances and exits, however they're going to be in and out or around, it's going to be right there in my face as far as where I'm situated in relation to 140 and the project. Again, there's some other issues. I know we could all get into a lot of detail, but these were a few I had, especially when it came to, I think, some of the zoning here. I'm all over the place. But
So just
bringing it up to 34,000, the square footage required for a multifamily, and then you would mention that's within, up to the bylaws, which are very vague.
yeah.
Okay.
So just the core questions I think you had were on the curb cuts and how they're going to line up with the driveways across
Yes,
the
and
street.
even the whole layout of that side of 140, there's no information on it.
Okay.
You're going to be discharging water onto 140. There are catch basins out there with drain manholes, but I don't know where any pipes are out there.
Yeah.
I do know there is one pipe, I believe, which is not connected to any of the catch basins or the manholes that discharges between the gas station and the produce barn, and it cuts across 140. But that whole stretch of road, when it rains, is big issues,
Okay. Yeah.
big drainage issues.
From a stormwater perspective, all their calculations are great. It's all going to get peer reviewed by another engineer who can look at what they've done, dig into the files, do all the calculations themselves, and do all that stuff to verify that in terms of the recharge, the catch basins, all that stuff. The stormwater bylaw for Norton requires that development not, I'm going to find the best way to say this, it can't increase the runoff off of the site from what it is now under a no-build condition.
Okay.
So the amount of stuff that runs off the site now has to be the same or less after construction. They have to retain all of that.
Okay, now I was curious because no test pits have been done out back there. What is the historic high watermark out there?
And the test pits are something that the peer reviewer would also look at with the stormwater. You're talking about the
Historic
the
high
wetlands
water
and
level out there with the wets and everything else.
all the wetlands and the stream that you mentioned and the potential for standing
Well, I do
water.
know
All that would be peer reviewed, and the conservation agent and conservation commission.
Yeah, I know that's coming up on the
So-
14th. I do know there is quite a bit of ledge out there, and that's why it's so wet. So,
Yeah, no, it's that area has certainly a lot of wetlands. Not that the rest of Norton doesn't, but
thank you.
it definitely does. But yeah, so
Okay, I'll let the other people speak at this point. I'm sure this is going to go on, and at some point I'm probably going to have some more questions. So,
that's fine.
thank you very much.
And Mr. Campbell, if you don't, at some point, whether it's you or Vanessa or somebody, just if there's a way to note on the plans, just to review at some point when we look through it, where the curb cuts on the other side of the road are, just to make sure that I'm sure that Vanessa's doing what they can to make those movements as best as possible,
Sure.
but just so we can see them and highlight them.
So we actually do have them all on the plan. The opposite side of 140 is here, with our first curb cut here, edge of pavement here. Second existing curb cut goes from here to here. Third curb cut is from here to here. And one of the reasons we chose the locations we did for the driveways so that either it was exactly adjacent to another curb cut, so both of you could see each other, or it was as far away from another curb cut as we could.
Okay.
I know some of the other questions having to do with the testing. We did multiple test pits out there. I'm sure the peer review will pick them up. And we have zero net runoff to 140 as a whole, with the exception of the sidewalk. So the sidewalk will provide some flow to 140 because of how they have it pitched. But the remainder of the site is captured inside of the driveways or in the parking lot. It's taking the small basins in the front. Those basins run to the large basin in the rear. So definitely, we're looking at all that. We'll review it with the review engineer.
Okay, thank you. So now, I see your hand. I'm going to go to the Zoom meeting for a second, and I'm going to come back to you. So the person in the Zoom meeting who has their hand raised and the computer is labeled, the icon is labeled Deidre iPhone. I know you had raised your hand earlier. If you can just, if you'd like to come on camera, you can. Otherwise, you don't need to. If you could just state your name and address for the record and ask any questions or comments you have.
Sure. Deidre Braga, 19 Reservoir Street. I know that most of my concerns are about the traffic study. They said they did it in March. Can you tell me what dates you did it in March?
I would have to ask the engineer to come back on, and he appears to be Johnny on the spot here, so he's coming to answer that right now.
Give me 1 second, I can answer.
Sure.
March 29th through 30th of 2023, which is a Wednesday and a Thursday.
Thank you very much.
I think my other concerns were brought up, and I can just repeat them here if that's all right. I would like this traffic study to be done again based off of the other construction that's happening on 140. And also just would like to contradict some of the comments made about COVID lessening traffic. I'm in the business world as well, and I'm required to go back to work now 4 days a week, and so are several other businesses. So I think that traffic excuse of COVID bringing it down is going to be reverted back to our, maybe not 100%, but it's going to be not where it's, where I think there was a comment before that someone's daughter wasn't going to work anymore. I see the opposite happening. So that's my comment, is I would like the traffic studies to be done again. You cannot get out of Reservoir Street. It takes several minutes, no matter what time of day it is. And just adding more traffic based on the other stuff, it's going to be difficult.
Yes. No.
I don't mind trying to cross the street if you're trying to get to the sidewalks on the other side of the road.
Yes. No. Definitely. And I understand. I'm in the office multiple days a week myself, but yeah, a lot of that data is driven by industry calculations that feed into everything, and so they're taking data from everybody and making it for all the traffic engineers to use as a standard. But yeah, we do need to check and make sure that all the projects that we know about are being accounted for in the study, and that's all the traffic stuff is also part of a peer review process.
Okay. And then I'm going to bring up something. I didn't know about this, but when I purchased this house, there was such contamination that occurred in that area, and nobody was allowed to use well water because of the gas leak all into that area, and knowing that it was wetlands, it was all contaminated. I don't know if that's been brought up at all or been researched.
I can't speak to that personally, but I can see that the applicant is making a note to check, and that's something that the Conservation Commission may look at as well. So thank you.
Yeah, because we're not allowed to use our well water on the street unless it's tested, and my understanding is that this gas leak occurred in that specific section that you're looking to build on.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Deirdre, if you don't mind lowering your hand in the Zoom meeting at some point, no rush, that would be perfect. Just so the ADD part of my brain doesn't think that you have any more questions. I know I saw a gentleman in the back here who was going to, in the person who had some questions or comments, so I'll ask you to come forward and just state your name and address for the record, please.
John Shea, 25 Reservoir Street. To all of you, thank you, honestly. It's a very thankless job. You get the list of us all complained to you. Alan, thank you for your memory. I sit here with a lot of people from Reservoir Street. If I put this number to you, $4 million, does that seem like a lot of money? Excuse me, to the engineer, $4 million. We look at it like this. We've sat here before. I'll make this part brief and quick. I believe the hookup is $15,000 per person?
Minimum.
Minimum,
quote.
thank you, minimum. Take a $50,000 sewer bill to each person. I live 310 feet. I know there's a house that's probably 1,000 feet. I know 60 area, there's a house way back there. I know there's 3 new houses being built right now. I can see the septic systems being buried. I got to that number adding years of sewer bills and the initial costs and stuff like that. We understand growth, we understand Bill, but to somebody that's gonna make millions of dollars a year on rental fees, to the taxpayers and the people here losing millions of dollars a year, I hope you take that into consideration somewhere, whether it's on this spot here or with the Conservation Commission. I have one specific question. If they do go ahead with this project, sewer down the road, on the plans, I believe it says a 3-inch sewer pipe. Is that adequate for that distance? I'm assuming yes, or
That would
no?
be something that the sewer commission would looked at. They've
Okay, good.
been in conversations with them. And, I mean, I definitely understand that, your concern about the sewer and the cost of hookups and everything like that.
I mean, I know there's people on that road right now that are suffering cancer, have disabled family members, retired, fixed income, brand new purchases. It gets to be a lot of money. I'll leave that one there. Next question I have to you is the board itself. You take these plans and plan ahead. This is an educational exchange right now between us. One of the very first questions, we have a 100-foot buffer zone on wetlands, right? Why are all 3 of those houses, buildings, whatever, plunked within 100 feet of the buffer zone? Why is the middle building 50 feet from the wetland zone? I mean, no one has mentioned anything about how, like that middle building right there, if you see the line going through it, over 85% of that building is within the 100-foot buffer zone of the wetlands. The Planning Board, Conservation Commission has established all these guidelines for years. Going back to yourself, talking about deer, wildlife, vegetation stuff. Do they do it intentionally? No disrespect. Do they do it intentionally to like build the project and then come and ask for permission to violate those rules? How's that work?
So I would say that there are different buffers with different rules and guidelines around them.
Yeah.
And I can ask the engineer to clarify what the 100-foot, 50-foot, et cetera, relates to in terms of what the requirements are for the bylaws, if that helps.
Okay. And do you take them into consideration at the planning level, or does Conservation does?
Both.
Okay.
I mean, the setbacks and the boundaries and all of that stuff affects the site plan and the buildings and the plans that we look at.
Okay.
It's something that impacts both boards.
All right.
A lot of times we end up in if we want one thing and the other board wants another thing, we end up having to talk about it in a joint session or something like that.
Okay.
So those are always discussions.
Final question, I promise. On the road, I've been there 24 years. We just got it paved. Forgive my memory, I'm getting older. But I think it's 2 or 3 or 4 years. 3 years ago, 4 years ago?
5-year moratorium.
Okay, I think we're still within the 5-year moratorium. Either way, the residents of that upper half of Reservoir Street are very happy with a nice, smooth, paved road. If you're going to take a sewer pipe going down the left-hand side 4,000 feet, cutting across the right-hand side 4,000 feet, I know in the plans they're going across people's driveways and stuff like that, there's a 5-foot cut there. Are they going to redo the whole road, or are they just going to fill in a pipe and then we're going to suffer the consequences of our cars and damage throughout time?
I can ask them that question. I promise you it won't be as bad as 123.
Promise? We're on tape right now. Thank you. With that said, sidewalks. I'm going to throw a curveball at you. If you're going to put 74 apartment houses times 2 people is another 150. The road needs sidewalks all the way around. With that said, and I apologize, that building E, closest one to the road.
Closest one to the corner.
The corner. Is that to the road, or so a sidewalk can be put in? As I just think about that right now. Like you said, it's 21 feet from the edge of the road.
Okay.
Would that
So-
be the sidewalk road or the road? Because if they can't put sidewalks down there.
Okay,
So-
understood.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I respond on the 100-foot buffer zone?
Sure, just to clarify, because I know
So
that.
just to clarify, the 100-foot buffer zone is the jurisdiction of the Conservation Commission. Outside of that, they have no jurisdiction. Inside of that, you are allowed to build as long as you get what's called an order of conditions from the Conservation Commission. That order of conditions takes into account what you're doing in the buffer zone and makes sure that you protect the wetlands in the way that you develop it. So it is not violating anything. It is just that you must prove to the Conservation Commission that you have taken the appropriate safeguards to make sure that the wetlands are not degraded.
Thank you.
And it's a 25-foot no-build zone, correct?
Yes, and we're not within the 25-foot no-build zone because basically people realized that when you went all the way up to the wetlands, it was hard not to degrade them. So basically there's a 25-foot buffer zone that is no touch. And then the next 75 feet you can touch, but you just got to do it right.
Thank you for the clarification. I know I saw a hand up back there. We have another one on the Zoom, so I'm going to come to you right after, if you don't mind. The meeting attendee I see with their hand raised is labeled Samuel Colburn, so I'll ask if they'd like to come off mute and just introduce themselves with their name and address, please.
Hi there. Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm Samuel Colburn of 50 Mansfield Avenue, so directly across from the corner lot there, across from Reservoir Street. The first question I have is more directed at the board here, because I'm not terribly familiar with the sewer situation. I heard someone referencing that if they extend the sewer along our property, are we required to connect to that within a certain number of years at our own expense? Is that what I'm understanding?
That is generally how the sewer arrangement works. When the pipe goes in on the larger street, they give you a window, the town gives you a window to hook up. I believe that is 7 years. And essentially the stubs that are on the street go up to your property line, and everything after that is on the homeowner. Obviously, I know that your property has a significantly long driveway, so that would not be productive for you.
Sorry, that would not be what?
Productive or nice.
Yeah, that would not be nice if that's my understanding. I mean, we're a quarter mile away from the street there, so if we're expected to lay a quarter mile of pipe at our own expense, I don't know what current rates are, but $50 to $250 a foot. We're talking about, a significant percentage of the value of my home just to get to keep living here in Norton, if I'm understanding that correctly. So this is suddenly a very concerning prospect to me.
That is, yeah.
I don't know how the exceptions or anything like that might work, or if those can be worked through with the sewer department in the case where we have sufficient property for our own private septic that can be well maintained. But I would love any help I can get on resources for that. Otherwise, I'm very firmly putting in a public comment that I'm pretty personally thoroughly opposed. Again, especially as another gentleman mentioned here, they mentioned other folks on the reservoir who might be affected by this, some of whom are on fixed incomes, and some of whom have cancer. And while I'm not on a fixed income, I do still have an active cancer diagnosis, and there are a lot of aspects for this that could significantly negatively impact the folks of Norton. So just their livelihoods and well-beings, if they're forced to take on such a financial burden for the personal profit of the owners of this development. So I hope that's taken into consideration, and that if we're going to move ahead here, perhaps there's some means to mitigate the impact on the residents of Norton in the area. This is concerning to the point of wondering if Norton is a viable place to live if things like this can land in our lap.
Yes, no. I would say
so
that
that's point one.
Sewer in general, that's why projects that look to add sewer always become contentious in a number of ways. Because when the sewer department puts the pipe down into the main road, part of the way that business organization utility is structured is that when they put that pipe down, they're expecting residents who have access to the sewer to hook up to the sewer. That's how their financial model works. I will not profess to be an expert on how any exceptions. I know there are state financing things that go into it. I do not profess to know all the details of all those programs, but even if you're financing money, that is still money. Regardless of what the interest rate is, even if it is zero, that is still money that it is costing. So that is something that would be with any project, not necessarily this project. The Sewer Commission also on their own has their own list of places they would like to expand the sewer system to. So at some point, areas that don't have sewer will have sewer, regardless of whether projects go in or not. So that is something that every town deals with differently. But I think the broad strokes of it, I think, are how most sewer utilities work in Massachusetts. And Mr. Campbell, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm kind of speaking of, that's pretty much goes for every town in the Commonwealth, correct?
Pretty much. My only clarification is we don't have any public sewer going into Mansfield Ave, so at least this gentleman wouldn't be affected by that.
So based on the current plans, tentative plans on the table with the sewer department?
Correct.
So you're going
Reservoir.
off the property to Reservoir, so
Correct.
not touching Mansfield.
Correct.
But, okay, so.
Okay, that's good to know. That again helps me personally. It doesn't help the folks on Reservoir Street, which well, I wish I wasn't biased in that particular point. Would be a relief to me, but still obviously a hardship for many. The second set of questions that I had was also around sidewalks here. The addition of that sidewalk, especially down to a bus waiting area, I think as I understood that waiting area was going to be on the corner with Mansfield Ave and Reservoir Street. Is that true?
I don't believe it's all the way to the corner. The corner itself is remaining wooded up to a certain point in time. And I think the specific waiting area is approximately how far from the intersection? From the start of the tree area?
The sidewalk turns the corner onto Reservoir, and we go approximately 120 feet past where the island is.
Okay, so I apologize. So that is you are intending for the waiting area to be right at that intersection? In theory.
It's about 220 feet onto Reservoir.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then the follow-up to that is, with the addition of the new sidewalk, is there any expectation of crosswalks being added anywhere, or would this only be a sidewalk along that one side of Mansfield Avenue rounding onto Reservoir and nothing else connecting with any other existing sidewalks?
Sure. Yeah, I don't think this would connect. I don't think there are any existing sidewalks for this to necessarily connect to. Sidewalks have been talked about across Norton in a number of ways. Reservoir has generally not worked just because of how the right-of-ways in the road are, and there's basically no room for them in a number of areas. In terms of the crosswalks, I'm not sure if there were any additional crosswalks cited on the plan. Those are generally driven by the potential for traffic and people crossing to a particular place. Mr. Campbell, were there any crosswalks evaluated?
So being a state highway, crosswalks would be at their purview. We would only be able to cross to the opposite side of Mansfield Ave, and the sidewalk on that side of the street is a little further down from where we are.
So if Mass DOT tells you to put a crosswalk, you will,
We will
but
have to put a
otherwise,
crosswalk,
but
yeah.
there's none planned at this time.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
I believe that's all of the questions that I had. If there's any way, should I get in touch with the sewer department to figure out what their current plans are for this, or how can I get more information about that?
Sure. Yeah, the Water and Sewer Commission does have contact information posted on the Town of Norton's website. So you should be able to reach out to them and at least get an overview of what the programs generally entail, if you're interested. Yeah. So.
Understood. Many thanks. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Colden. I know I saw a gentleman in the back here who had his hand up earlier, so I'll ask you to come forward and state your name and address for the record, please.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Jim Shepard. I live at 56 Mansfield Avenue. I don't have any questions per se. I rise in opposition to the granting of a special permit for this project. I do so under the purview of the zoning code. I'm sure you're all aware of the conditions required to issue a special permit. I'm going to read them mostly to keep myself on track, not to educate you.
That's fine.
One, it must be socially and economically desirable. I think we've heard quite a bit already about the negative economic impact that the sewer could have. Somewhat different than a public sewer built with public funds, the people wouldn't have to pay a betterment. However, they would be required, should their septic system fail, they would not be able to replace it. They would have to tie in. Being a force main, there's an additional cost besides the tie-in fee. You also have to buy a pump and have that all wired in. In the last 6 months, we've constructed a house where we were required to do it. We were only 40 feet from the street, and our cost out of pocket was $25,000. This is quite an impact for a mile of roadway. Another impact would be, we know we need housing. We know people need a place to live. However, economically, I'm not sure of the current number, but the number has always been that one housing unit requires 1.4 amount of expenditure for the taxes paid in. So housing units economically for the town are always a net loss.
I know I've heard that number quoted, and I confess I don't know exactly where it came from, but I know I've
That's
heard it.
why I said I don't know if it's changed or not, and I have to admit,
I know I've heard it in relation to
I don't think I've
single-family.
seen the actual studies.
I know I've heard it in relation to single-family units. I'd have to understand where it came from to know if it
Correct.
applied to
And it could be
No, I hear
different in apartment situation with less children and that kind of thing there. Two, it has to satisfy an existing need. We do have a need, but that need isn't there. That need is the old Reed and Barton property. One of the things I can recall from my time here is that a planning board does do a lot of planning. They don't do it at meetings, they don't do it at hearings, they do it in between as they make recommendations for zoning, as they input and participate in the master plan process. The planning is done, look at that, I forgot a word. The planning is done, for lack of a better word, in a vacuum, because no one plans with emergencies and longing faces, people begging. That's a poor way to do planning. The best way to do planning is quietly, where you can sit down and look at all the needs and come up with a plan outside of a lot of pressure, which is one of the reasons it's done that way, and it culminates in the granting or denial of a special permit, site plan, all those kind of things are the culmination of the planning process. The advantage have to outweigh any detrimental effects. And this might be a good point to take a detour and tie those two together. I don't see an advantage, other than potentially, they're talking about 1 and 2 bedroom apartments, outside of the affordable housing guidelines, just by the nature of it, a one-bedroom apartment's gonna be more affordable than a three-bedroom or four-bedroom house. So if I had to look for an advantage, I'd have to concede that. However, as part of the Land Use, Housing, and Economic Development Workshop, we developed a map. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. It was part of the input to the master plan. And that map identified neighborhood shops for that area, basically for that triangle. I believe it was the impetus for input into the master plan, which shares that same vision. It talks about transforming Norton's Village Center into a walkable, vibrant destination for residents, students, and visitors, that being the VCC, the Village Core Commercial District, but outlying in other areas, including this one and in Chartley. Prior to that, we've had Village Commercial. We've thought, wouldn't it be something if we could have shops close to the road with parking behind? And I know a lot of people stood up at town meeting and said, this is a pipe dream. This is Norton. This isn't Barnstable. This isn't Easton. We're nobody. But a lot of people thought different, and they thought, maybe we should believe in Norton. Maybe we should wait, and we should say, you know what? Maybe we are good enough. Maybe we are worthy. Maybe we don't have to say we're not as good as the other towns around. And I believe the Village Commercial District was part of that vision. Steve had brought up the parking in the rear, and I believe that was required for, I think it was High Tech Automotive was one of the earlier site plan reviews in Village Commercial, and that was absolutely required. The architectural views had to be right, and the parking had to be in the back. Okay, one of the goals and strategies in the master plan, I'm on page 11, goal 1.1. One, to implement and promote a village center core district, I've talked about that. Two, to update the use tables to attract emerging and changing types of uses, and that's village commercial. That's shops with accessory apartments. That's a village feel. It's where we can get things we need. We can provide places for people to live and make Norton a nicer town. Goal 1.2 follows with that, to encourage compact mixed use, to implement new zoning overlays with a clear design standards for opportunity areas along corridors, which this was identified as one. Look at all those pages that I didn't have to read from. Do you like that? I did have one that I had highlighted but missed somehow. There it is. Okay, along with goal 1.1 in the master plan, it says one barrier to the creation of more affordably priced housing on the market is the lack of housing diversity. Beyond traditional multifamily apartment buildings built by larger developers, the missing middle includes duplexes, triplexes, and accessory dwelling units. An accessory dwelling unit is a smaller secondary house or apartment that shares the lot of a larger primary house. Some ADUs are standalone, meaning they are built in the rear yard or above an existing outbuilding such as a garage. Some are built in rear additions, attics, or existing buildings area of a larger home. They're useful for older households who do not need as much space but would benefit from additional income. And then it goes on from there. But I guess my point is, this has been for quite a few years, the dream of Norton is actually becoming a nicer, better town with shops, with accessory apartments, the things the nice towns have. And I suppose if we've done this much planning, if we've gone before all the other boards and commissions and they've all agreed, gone to town meeting and argued basically the same as I'm arguing now for the creation of these zones, town meeting's gone along with it. I guess what I'm asking you is, this isn't going to change. There's no reason you can't close this public hearing, vote against this special permit and maintain our belief that Norton can be nice. And I don't know if I should say this or not, but I can't help but think it's not possible to talk about 3 24-unit apartment buildings and say the word village in the same sentence with a straight face. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'll just add one point of clarification for you, sir. The project site is in Village Commercial, not
Correct.
the Village Center core zone.
Yes.
Just to,
No, I realize that. But Village Commercial was shops with apartments, parking in the back,
yeah.
a lot of what Steve talked about.
Yeah, and thank you for going into the master plan and reviewing that. I know we spent a lot of time on that, and it's...
I spent a lot of time on the last one.
Yeah, okay. I don't see anybody else with their hand raised in the Zoom meeting, so I'm gonna stay here and I see you here. So sir, if you'd like to come up and just state your name and address for the record, please.
How you doing tonight? Bill Rotundi, 17 Reservoir Street. Have a question and probably a comment or two. Question first. Lot E. You're indicating you're going to put up some opaque fence. How high is that fence going to be?
I can ask them that in clarification, but the idea is that it would roughly block the view of the property from Reservoir Street.
So if say 9 Reservoir Street was looking out their second floor window, you're blocking
I'm not going to say
4-foot or a 4-story building essentially?
3-story building, but I will,
plus the roof.
okay. Mr. Kim, just to clarify the height of the fence that's proposed on Reservoir Street.
Sure. 2 things.
Yeah.
First, it's a 35-foot tall building, which is the zoning allowable in this district.
Yes.
Second, the fence is proposed at 6 feet because anything greater than 6 feet requires a zoning variance.
Okay. Thank you.
So
And that's something that if we look at the plan and don't feel that that's tall enough, then we can recommend that the fence size be increased. And I'm sure that in the things that the applicant has gone to zoning commissions for, the height of a fence is probably number 272 on the high stress number of things.
So thank you for that clarification. The Reservoir Street is residential. So I don't know about, C and D, whether I'm going to be able to see through the woods that are going to be clearly diminished, whether I'm going to see the back of these buildings. Clearly, Lot E, you're going to see. No offense to apartments, no offense to apartment dwellers. That's going to decrease the value of a house. So first you're going to hit us with sewer, and we've already estimated, we called for a quote, $45,000 just to hook up. Then you're going to take away my equity. That's a tough nut for the people of Reservoir Street to all, swallow for the betterment of this investor.
I understand your feeling.
So, hopefully that gets taken into account. I think the second thing I'd like to point out or ask, is there any other place in Norton that would have such a density backed up to a residential neighborhood? I don't think so. Apartments on East Main, condos across, business to this side, Red Mill that side. Stuff going in behind McDonald's, essentially commercial. To echo some of the other things said here, I'm not sure this is the appropriate use of this property. I've been there since, the end houses on Reservoir were built. It's been wood since I moved in. I'm not seeing this as the best use. Thank you.
Sir. Miss, I saw his hand first just a second, so Peter, if you'd like to come up and, I know we all know who you are, but if you can just state your name and address again.
Peter Wiggins, 157 Mansfield Avenue, Norton, Massachusetts, Mayor Norton, and I go by that road a lot of times. I walk by the road lots and lots of times, and Sunday I did a little report on there about the Reservoir Street and Mansfield Avenue, and Mansfield Avenue can get busy at times during rush hour, and I do my best to walk with the flow of the traffic. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Miss, if you want to.
Thank you. My name is Susan Rich. I'm at 15 Reservoir Street. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I sincerely appreciate the opportunity. I would just like to respectfully request of the board two requests. One being, I sincerely hope that the feedback and the input that you're hearing from the taxpayers and residents of this town tonight, you will carry that with a heavier weight as you go through your deliberations, your considerations of this proposal. I hope you will place a far greater weight on what you're hearing from the taxpayers and residents tonight. This neighborhood, I'm not sure if you're aware, but this neighborhood on Reservoir Street is comprised of residents who have lived in this neighborhood, built this beautiful neighborhood for 20 years plus, except for one neighbor. We have one new neighbor. But all of the residents on that area of Reservoir, we've all been there for more than 20 years. And we've created this beautiful neighborhood that I'm afraid with all due respect, with this proposal, will drastically destroy our beautiful neighborhood. So I would ask you to take into consideration at a greater weight what you're hearing from us this evening. Also, the traffic volume, thank you, Mr. Goulet, for bringing up that traffic volume that will be increased from that construction down by McDonald's, that huge apartment complex. We cannot get out of Reservoir onto 140 half of the time with the Xfinity concerts, with just the volume of traffic that's coming through our town now. Oftentimes, the traffic light from 123 and 140, which I'm sure you're familiar with, the traffic will back up to the produce barn. So how is anyone going to get out onto 140? It just, to me, is a public safety issue. And also, I just, in summary, I would ask that you not approve this proposal at all. We are a neighborhood of single-family homes. Single-family homes do not need apartment buildings. Not that apartment buildings shouldn't be built maybe in other areas of the town, like behind McDonald's. Not negatively impacting this beautiful neighborhood of single-family homes. So I would ask you, put yourself in our shoes. That property has been vacant. It's a beautiful wooded area. There are a lot of wildlife. I had to construct a fence on my property to keep the deer out of my property because we have an overabundance of deer, not to mention the other critters that are running around. But I would just ask you to put yourself in our shoes If you had built a beautiful neighborhood with your wonderful neighbors over 20 years, and now you have this dropped in your lap. So please put yourself in our shoes as you're going through your deliberations, and please place a higher weight of value on what you're hearing from us. So once again, thank you for the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. I think as a couple of people mentioned, this is not going to be the only time we talk about this project. All of the data and plans are going to get peer reviewed by their engineers, and we'll have other opportunities to speak and ask and think about all of this. And, this is what the applicant who owns the property has proposed, so that's what we're evaluating. If they propose single family, we'd be looking at single families. So this is what they proposed us to take a look at, so that's what we're doing. I do see another person on the Zoom meeting who's raised their hand. I see the computer's name is Mike Martin. If you'd like to come off mute and just state your name and address for the record, please.
Hey everybody, this is Mike Martin. I'm here with my wife, Kelly Martin. We're at 54 Mansfield Avenue.
Thank you.
We just wanted to chime in to respectfully ask not to approve the special permit. We just want to add our voice in opposition, similar to what other residents have mentioned today. Certainly what Sam was talking about with the concerns about the sewer, that would be a huge impact with, approximately 800 foot of pipe that we'd have to run to our house. Plus concerns about the rush hour rush hour wood areas, and then just general concerns about property value. So that's just a general statement. And then I had one question that I wasn't quite sure I understood was if any of the units are subsidized housing or not. I thought I heard him say that some of it might be, but I just wanted to double check on that.
Sure. So just 2 points of clarification. The sewer, as proposed for this project, would go off the back of the property onto Reservoir, so it would not affect Mansfield Avenue. So that's the first one that I'll do. Norton's housing bylaws for different types of developments require that a certain percentage of units are affordable housing units. All of those guidelines and program details are managed at the state level. So if it's going to be an affordable unit under Mass state law, it has to do X, Y, and Z. In terms of what is subsidized, I think that refers simply to the market rate compared to what you're going to rent it at. It's not a 40B project, which is what an example of what is going in near McDonald's, where it's a state program for potential subsidized housing or things like that. So that's an overgeneralization, but some of the units would need to be quote unquote affordable according to state guidelines, which is not a subsidy, it's just a rate.
Okay.
And thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that. And I would just add to what my husband said that, for us, we moved to Norton 2.5 years ago. We really like the community. We care a lot about our home value and also the neighborhood. Like Reservoir Avenue is beautiful. There are, single family homes on Mansfield Ave as well. And putting these apartments in, obviously we have concerns about losing that beautiful wooded area there and the impact to our home value. My last question about you said about the sewer, we understand that the current plans is for the sewer to go in on Reservoir, but if that were to change and the plans were to be on Mansfield, would we be notified of that? Because I know Mike mentioned we would have 800 feet of pipe to pay for, and at Jim's rates that he mentioned earlier, that would be $500,000 worth of sewer charges for us to hook up. So we would obviously want to be notified, I guess, if if this did get approved, which we hope it doesn't, and if the plans did change, because that would be a very significant impact for us.
So the proposal right now is what the applicant has worked out, has proposed with the Water and Sewer Commission. The Water and Sewer Commission are the experts on the water and sewer. In terms of a notification, if the plans change, So in terms of process, this hearing is going to be continued as soon as we finish discussion. We'll continue it to a specific date, so you know when we're going to talk about it next. Generally, that will probably be after the applicant has had time to take into account our comments. If they started talking to peer review engineers, they mentioned they're going to be before Conservation Committee in 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks. My calendar brain is not quite correct. So we'll work out when the next time they would come before us and speak. Any of those discussions that we know are going to come up, we can try to, there's not an official notification about that kind of a change in the plan. What I've generally found is that there's a few, with a lot of projects, there's a number of core people who show up to all the hearings, and when there's a big hearing coming up, everybody joins again to talk about it. But I think that changing the orientation of the sewer would be a significant change that would go against some of the decision-making that's already gone into the property. So you never say never, but I don't think that that's something that would change at this point in the process.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. And I'll stall again for a minute to see if anybody else in person would like to make any additional comments, or anybody else on the Zoom meeting would like to ask any additional questions. And until I ramble myself hoarse here, I'm going to go to Mr. Jacoby, or, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you with the TV. I apologize.
Jane Rotundi, 17 Reservoir Street. Can I just ask you to consider not approving this? I don't think I need to repeat all the arguments that you've heard. We are a single-family home, we're a neighborhood, and I was the one doing the phone calls for the sewer hookup. I don't have 45,000 extra, and that's just the warm-up soft number. I don't know how you think 27, or I'd ask you to consider 27 families coming up with that, and we're one of the houses that's closer. There's a lot of more setback, and it's an exorbitant amount of money. We just don't have that sitting around because somebody else wants to make a profit. And it's a neighborhood, it's not where the apartments are right now. There's no place in Norton that I'm aware of that has apartments building being proposed right where there's all these single family homes. So thank you for your time, thank you for listening, thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. No, I would just say the sewer and what that does is something that we evaluate in this project and other projects. If anybody watched the hearing that we had on a proposed subdivision further up Reservoir, that was a significant topic of discussion as well. So it is something that we always consider looking at projects. So, Mr. Jacoby, I see you have, is there anything you wanted to ask?
Seems like we've come to the end of the evening.
Yes.
And we would request a continuance, and I'm thinking that whatever your meeting date is, August, is probably not going to be sufficient time to have our opening conversation with the Conservation Commission to get peer reviews going. I'm not sure how long they will take. You use Horsley Witten?
There are a number of different firms that are, we do peer review. Horsley Witten is one of them.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's who was retained.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, they've gotten a bit slower lately.
They do a good job.
They do a very good job and a very thorough job, but they've been taking a bit longer for their time for review. So I'm thinking that some date in September that you have a meeting scheduled would be the appropriate time to continue to. And if we haven't made enough progress on the peer review, we can always ask for continuance and make sure that all the neighbors are notified. But it would seem to me that August would just be too soon.
Okay. So let me pull up my calendar here.
September 26th.
Do we just have the one?
It's on the 12th. We're on 12th too?
12th and 26th.
Okay.
Excuse me?
So we have on the schedule, yes, I see the 12th as well. So we have September 12th and September 26th currently as our September meetings.
I would with Labor Day.
Well, Labor Day is the week before.
Yeah, but I'm just thinking that for the peer review to be effective, I'm thinking the 26th would probably be a date that would be a better use of everyone's time.
Okay. So the applicant is requesting continuance to September the 26th. Do we have any additional questions, comments, concerns at this time that we'd like them to, before we do that we'd like to share with them? Steve, we can have Brian pass along the renderings if we want to that you've done in the interim, just as an example or a concept.
It's in the email.
Perfect. If there's anything else that we would like to give Mr. Campbell or anything else in terms of homework, I would say let's speak now or hold our peace.
Can we get the Water and Sewer Commission some feedback from them and do them on the agenda, since we seem to talk about it quite often, just so we can set it straight?
You would not be surprised to see that I wrote in my things to do tomorrow is email the Water and Sewer Commission for their priority plan list to understand that beyond the scope of any individual project.
Mr. Shattuck brought up something which maybe there's a rule, since it is being installed privately, is there a different rule for hookup? I don't think so, but it's worth asking.
And if I may, as I said, I'm hoping to meet with him tomorrow. So if I can meet with them, and then even if they come in another day, that would be great.
Yeah. Generally, Frank has provided comments to us in writing.
Yes.
So
yeah,
that generally works. And I know I attended one of their meetings for a past project, and it worked. It seems to work well. So.
Okay, well, we want to thank you for your time and consideration tonight, and we look forward to answering your questions, reviewing plans, revising where necessary, and having a productive hearing on September 26th.
Okay. So I see, and remember, just so we're looking to basically pause, and we'll continue speaking again on September the 26th.
Okay, there was just one thing that was missing from the application. The effects on the neighborhood and environment shall not be significantly greater than if the permit were denied, and there are no plans to show us what the project looks like without the permit. I believe that should be required to be presented, right?
Project without the permit would be what it is now, I think. That would be the...
Well, by right, they could pursue by right.
They could in theory.
Maybe 8 or 10 single-family homes or whatever, but
that's something
I think to answer that question, you probably should require that.
That's something the board can always evaluate as it relates to any project. Thank you. Okay.
We do one motion with all the... we want to do them separately.
Let's do all of them together as a procedural. So we're continuing the combined site plan reviews and special permits discussions for 0 Mansfield Avenue to September the 26th.
So moved.
Seconded.
Okay, thank you, Alan and Eric. Is there any further discussion on the motion to continue? Okay. Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Abstentions? Okay.
Thank you very much.
We'll see you here on the 26th. I'll just say for everybody else who's still in the room, we do have another agenda item after this, so you're welcome to stick around and hear it. Otherwise, I'd ask that you please leave generally quietly. The other item we had on our agenda is that we had Mr. Cogliano looking to discuss with us early about some town meeting articles. I'm not sure if Joe is still out there in the hallway. I think I heard him. So,
Start with traffic?
for this or for,
No, this.
please, why not? Okay. Good evening, Mr. Cogliano.
Hello, how have you been?
We are doing well.
Is there anything you want to do? Raining out there tonight, it's pretty bad.
Is it still raining? I've been here for a couple hours.
Well, I'm hoping I win Mega Millions tonight. If I do, the next meeting we'll have will be in Hawaii. We'll all go.
that a promise?
Yeah.
Okay. So
what I wanted to do, just give me a second here, I'm gonna get the thing out. So the reason that I have come tonight is because I just wanted to find out where, should I give my name?
yes, please. Just for
Joe Cogliano, 202 Bay Road. So what I wanted to do was find out what are the board's plans regarding the solar bylaw for the fall. Are we still going to pursue that?
I think that there's still discussion about how we want to pursue it. I know that we have looked at a few different things. One of the things that I know I sent around to the board recently was the town of Medway's recent bylaw on battery storage systems that was partially approved by the state and partially denied. They did do a good job of breaking out into different tiers the types of battery storage systems. But what they didn't do that the state didn't allow was that they tried to limit them in only one zone out of like 20. Maybe not 20, but at least like 10 or 12 zones. So the state viewed that as you're making zoning to prohibit this, so no. But that I think is something that if we were to evaluate the battery storage aspect of solar, that's something that we would draw from. They did a lot of research on it. It seems a shame to put it to waste, especially when it's language that the Attorney General has already looked at and already not found objectionable.
Yeah. I mean, I'd have to look at it. I've read some of the letters that the Attorney General has come out with, and it's obviously, along with everything else in the state, a very pro-solar without a complete understanding of these systems and the dangers behind them. So I'd like to see that. Do you have a copy of that letter?
It's available, it's published on their website.
On Medway?
Yes. I have it, and I can send it to Brian.
Okay.
I have the Attorney General.
Yeah, the Attorney General one doesn't say what the actual language is, though. That's just the...
Does that mean there still needs to be more discussion, or we're still thinking about doing something for the fall?
There still needs some more discussion, I think.
Okay.
The other complicating factor, I'll speak for myself, is the fact that we haven't had a planner for a few months. We do have a new town planner scheduled to start in August. So not before our next session, but in the middle of the month. So that's something that, would be something to review, and to get that to fall would be tight probably for them to feel like for them to have input.
So you're thinking more like the spring now?
That's kind of my personal thoughts. I'm not sure if anybody else has additional.
How much are we going to bite off at a time is the question. I don't think you can bite off the whole large-scale, small grid, like we talked about previously, and battery stuff. How much are we going to present at a time? I'm just afraid of it again being too overwhelming, too much information at one time. I don't know if we're better off, biting it off in smaller chunks. Not to put it off, but you know how hard it is to present it in town meeting.
And the other question is, are people going to, and the opposite side of that is, are people going to be like, why are we talking about solar again? We just talked about solar last meeting.
In the meeting before.
Exactly. So that's, I think, where I always struggle with.
I think one of the questions is there going to be one bylaw or two? Because batteries don't need solar. So there's a 205 megawatt system in Dayton that's being developed. And there's the 150 megawatts in Carver, so I don't know how you feel about that.
The state has determined in there, the DPU has determined that, and I think the Attorney General agreed, that batteries are considered solar.
I haven't read that. The problem is that
There's no evidence to support that. You've got the DOER calling them an adder. You have the DOER pairing them with solar. The DOER pays more for batteries than they do for solar, at least in regards to agriculture. I know that the political situation is such that they want it to be that way. And as for what the AG is doing, again, the problem that they have is they can't violate the section of 48, Section 3, that allows prohibition based on the health, safety, and welfare of the public. So that's why I'm saying I have to read this stuff and see. But the bottom line is I sent Brian, I think he said he sent it to you, a letter that I had written to the House and the Senate on their recent solar bills.
Yes.
And
I know you referenced the bills specifically. Do you have a plain language summary of what those entailed?
Well, there was quite a number of bills. This particular bill...
You called out two or one or two.
Right, the House and the Senate. The point of those two bills, in essence, was to give towns more authority over how they do solar. I think it really, considering how 48 Section 3 has been used by the state, it was to take away some of the strength of 48 Section 3, is the way that I would view that. Which I think is right, because I don't think that this rises to the level of religion or food production. Yet, in my opinion, it's being pushed as a religion.
Kind of Dover, yeah.
Yeah, the Dover Amendment is what they're using to support it. Now, the thing that really bothers me about it is that I don't think that people understand the negatives to these systems, which is what I tried to get across in the letter and why I thought it would be good for everybody here to read that. I mean, I'll tell you tonight here, you know, Tim was on the old board, you know, when we had that thing going on, we didn't understand all the issues behind this. And I can tell you, you were not told all the stuff that was involved here by the applicant at that time. So I can tell you, this is no joke when you're talking about hydrofluoric acid. Now, the problem is that these lithium-ion batteries, as I've said before, they're so wonderful in a cell phone. We couldn't really do this without these lithium-ion batteries. But at the scale that we're producing these energy systems, they're actually dangerous. You know, why is that? Because once they go into a state of thermal runaway, there is no off switch. So when they're talking about, like when, you know, in our case, we're going to be able to call the fire department. They're going to have a STAT-X system, which actually doesn't work well on those. We're going to have all these other bells and whistles. It's going to vent. It's going to do this. None of that matters. Once it goes into thermal runaway, down in other parts of the country,
between the catalysts is gone.
Yeah, it's gone. They've been putting cars into pools, swimming pools down south, right?
They have dumpster trucks now. They're using the big cars.
Yeah, and they just keep burning underwater because the chemical reaction continues. So what, you know, why is that a really big issue and why you have to be very careful about these things is because when they're in that state and you apply the best method to cool them, which is water, you get hydrofluoric acid. Let me just read this to you because it's really amazing. This is from an article on hydrofluoric acid from 2019. Hydrofluoric acid is an inorganic chemical compound that is highly corrosive. These are all quotes. This compound differs greatly from other acids because it uses fluoride ions that readily penetrate the skin and will lead to significant destruction of tissue layers deep in the body down to the bone. Hydrofluoric acid is one of the most dangerous inorganic acids. A trace amount of exposure to this chemical on the skin, as small as 1% of body surface area burns, could be fatal due to the acid's corrosive properties. So this isn't me. This is other people that understand these systems. So the big question, and I think I raised it in that letter, is where do you want to put this? Industrial areas make sense to me. On landfills makes sense to me. You've already got damage to the soil anyway. You don't want this around water. Water doesn't interact well with lithium. You don't want this around water supplies or anything that could damage our ability to stay alive ourselves.
You don't want it around areas that require high-density evacuations. You don't want this. A friend of mine was involved with a project in Boston, I think it was for Beth Israel Hospital, about putting one of these systems. The Boston Fire Department didn't want that on top of a hospital building. How do you get all those people out of the hospital? Because one of the problems, and Tim seems to know about this stuff burns so hot and so quickly, they can't get it under control. It's really that dangerous. And I don't think we, as the public, have been informed of all this stuff because people are making money. People are making money off it. So I guess, so one of the questions I have is, are we thinking still about a single bylaw or two bylaws? And that kind of goes to what you were talking about, as in pieces. Or maybe you do one bylaw, you have a bylaw within a bylaw, and then you break it up later. You pull out I don't know, but I'm just saying there are things to think about.
One thing that's advantageous about waiting is maybe we're going to get another Medway bylaw, not from Medway, another town. The longer we wait, there's going to be more precedent set, more bylaws written.
Yeah. Medway is at least a new one after Tracer Lane.
Yeah.
Which seems to define where the line is better.
Here's my concern. We spend all of this time and effort and money to update our bylaws, and then the state comes in and somebody appeals to the DPU, and whoever wants to put that in gets deemed a public utility, and they override our bylaws. They're useless.
Well, I think you're right, potentially, except for that issue about the prohibition for the health, safety, and welfare of the public, which...
But they've demonstrated, Medway was not able to demonstrate that.
Well, one of the things that I saw a copy of a letter from, I think the lady's name is Margaret Hurley from the Worcester, she's the chief of the Worcester division of the AG's office, I believe. And they also try to pair solar with batteries. That's one of the things that they're trying to do. But I could see from that they didn't really understand the issues that were involved here with these dangers. I think the public needs to be made more aware of what's happening.
I think this is all evolving.
Yeah.
And maybe as opposed to being the trendsetter and reacting to it, in being proactive, maybe we wait for more guidance from the state and do it reactively. Is my thought. If the state is just going to override us, I don't see the point.
I guess I'd have to look at the letters first that were done so I can understand them. Even Tracer Lane, which has been used by the land court, they're solar happy in the land court. Tracer Lane was used, but even within that lawsuit, it says that towns can still reasonably regulate solar where it is. It was just that the road itself was preventing the project. And I think only 1% of Waltham was allowing, or they're only allowing it on 1% or something, it was too small.
They checked all the boxes of, we're going to make this impossible for you by zoning.
Right.
Yeah.
And they didn't even bother with the Attorney General's opinion. They just went to the DPU and got Medway Grid LLC named a public utility, which overrode their bylaws.
Yeah. What doesn't, what overrides the DPU is 48 Section 3. That overrides them because they're using the Dover Amendment, which then relates to the Constitution. So that's the same thing with the building codes. They're trying to do this through the building codes.
That's the other concern I have is it basically states that these are going to be regulated under building code, and the state building code supersedes any town building code.
And that deals, though, with methods and materials, not with location. The zoning is what deals with location. So, for example, in this town, especially because of all the water, you could make a case for prohibiting because of water concerns. And now we have, because of my case, we actually have a case where the judge has found that there's a contamination risk to my wells. So there's actually now, some evidence of that. And the experts that I hired, one of the experts that I hired is his company are the people that advise the National Fire Protection Association. They're involved with that, as an example. They also have done work for the U.S. Navy because apparently submarines use batteries.
And they go in the water.
And they go in the water.
I mean, I hate to say this, but I don't think we're going to have don't think you're going to achieve from the state what you're looking to until we have an event that fully demonstrates the issue to public safety.
You may be right. I've often thought that one of
Then
these
there'll be precedent.
battery systems exploding, I don't think people have any idea how horrible this is going to be when one of these things goes bad. And
Even just one of the house units goes bad.
Yeah.
Installing down.
I mean, that's tricky because, I do think that people in their homes should be able to do, pretty much what they want as long as it's somewhat safe. Like everybody throws around this NFPA 855. That's the code for energy storage. All that is a minimum requirement. That's the same thing as all the bells and whistles. That is not going to stop thermal runaway. So
When the barrier's gone, catalysts have a free flow.
But if we're doing a district, or if we're doing something, say a residential district's in a water protection district, can you have a battery storage system then? I think it gets very complicated.
Well, my view is no, you shouldn't, because if you contaminate the water, I think I had mentioned also in that letter that all you needed for HF, hydrofluoric acid, is 5 pounds of material. And in my situation, that original project was for 150 tons. 150 tons of material. So, well, why don't we, so it sounds like we're thinking about it, but we're not ready to move forward, is what I'm hearing. Where there's like things going on, we kind of want to see.
If we had a town planner that had some more time under their belt too, that's going to help a lot.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know, SERPID funding or time with SERPID, in some way,
I think
shape,
we're going to have to demonstrate, the only way you're going to be able to get it where it will hold is if there's a clear demonstration of a public safety or health issue.
You're saying just prohibiting it.
Yeah.
We can go as far
We
as
can do
Midway
whatever we
did.
want, the state will override us.
Yeah. Can you explain the mechanics of what happened in Midway?
Yeah, so this company, Medway Grid, came in and had owned a piece of property that they bought from Eversource, wanted to tie into a power plant, and they wanted the battery storage system put in Medway. The petition came in, Medway hired a very high-profile Boston consulting firm to develop this zoning overlay, and I saw their budget, they paid for it. And the company had made recommendations and they put it forward to town meeting. It did pass. They went into effect on June 30th of 2023. The problem is so the Attorney General, you saw the letter, they cautioned that you can do this, however, if any of these companies apply to the state, to the DPU, Department of Public Utilities, under the state's, renewable or alternative energy initiative, the state would look upon them favorably, and they determined that Medway Grid LLC is a public utility for the purposes of this project, and which basically means it overrides the town's bylaws. So all of the time and effort they spent a year and a half putting these in place, getting them approved, they just went into place, and it was all for naught. The state has determined that Medway Grid is a public utility, and they're moving forward. They did the same thing with a
So that
property in Carver.
The next person that wants to do battery storage is going to do the same thing.
Yeah.
There are a lot of smart people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, all they have to do is appeal to the DPU and say it's, in the best interest of the state under your renewable energy program or initiative. And so far, and they have referenced that, the Attorney General has referenced, or it was the Attorney General, the DPU, basically said you've been unable to demonstrate any credible risk to public health or safety. And therefore, it is a public utility. We need it. We want it. They're doing it.
That was the same thread that they used in the Carver letter
It was exactly the same.
that
Carver was
they
also-
wrote.
Yeah.
That's why I was going to say, one of the things we have to do in the meetings and at town meeting is to state why it's a health and safety issue. As I'm saying, some of that is now we have a record of it because of the experts in my case and because of the findings of the court. The court found that thermal runaway can occur. The court found that my wells can be contaminated. The court found that it's a danger if there's a fire in the air. So some of that now is on the record. So, I mean, I need to see that. I need to have an attorney look at it myself to see what the angles are. But what we're dealing with here, in my opinion, is politics and a religion, a synthetic religion. It's really amazing that it could go this far. So,
yeah. So, I mean, we could get to where we can take the very expensive bylaw that Medway made and use it. To your point, that will make it harder, but not that much harder.
Yeah.
It's probably not a bad step to take.
Well, interestingly, so the company filed their petition in February of 2022. Medway started almost immediately on working on their bylaw changes. They got it done just in time to be able to stop them. Literally, they were running concurrently with both of their projects, and the state came in and...
But we could take that very expensive bylaw and leverage it. But that would only get us to the point where the public utility argument would come in again.
Yes.
It's not necessarily a bad thing to have a good bylaw.
Well, there's also the building code too, so we would probably want to get Nick involved because the Attorney General's letter is basically saying
the broad strokes.
The building code is going to override a bylaw. The state building code is going to override a town bylaw.
I mean, I think you have to take the Medway letter, you take whatever the building codes have been changed to, and you have to go to an attorney and you have to say, where are the holes in this?
Right now, the state's got the hammer.
Yeah.
So they do. They actually need to be sued in federal court because what they're doing is unconstitutional.
Yeah.
There's due process problems here, there's private property problems here, but that's all gone with the wind until somebody takes the state to federal court. That's what's going to happen. In any event, so, you know,
so fall seems aggressive.
Yeah, so fall's not going to happen. I hear that. So I'm going to look at this Medway letter and investigate that. So I buy that, so fall is off. But let's keep an open mind. Let's not give up the ship yet. You know, I read what the AG is saying. I don't agree with it. I don't think it's appropriate. I don't even think it's legal, but they're getting away with it right now, like a lot of things. One other thing that I want to mention
That's
about...
why we have elections, I guess.
Yeah. One other thing I want to mention about solar, something to think about, is that noise has always been a problem with solar. All these projects, people complain about noise. And one of the issues, has been how can we stop noise at the property line, which is very hard to do. So I just want to mention that I spoke to a sound expert about this, and he basically told me that if you can limit the increase in noise to 3 dB above the ambient without the equipment running, most people won't notice that noise level.
Yeah.
So in my case, the judge found that the town can have a stricter requirement than the Mass DEP, which is a 10 dB increase. Okay, so that's okay. The problem was there was no specific given. It just simply said no noise at the property line, no perceptible sound at the property line.
That was a Joe Fernandez condition, yes.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that going forward on these things, that a 3 dB increase over ambient is more reasonable and would still get you, for at least most people, to where it really wouldn't be perceptible.
But we don't have a bylaw.
We do not have a noise bylaw.
That's why, but you...
In our, let's see, so we don't have a noise bylaw in Norton. The state, as Joe mentioned, is 10 at the property line. But the problem with that is, if you don't do testing before, how do you know what ambient was? So that's a fun chicken and the egg thing if you don't think of it first. So you need to have a condition for pre-ambient for testing and then retesting. But in the condition that was appealed, there was no perceptible noise at the property line, which was decided to be overly vague, and will be coming back to us at some point to look at again.
So what I'm suggesting is that might be something to put into the solar bylaw. That for projects.
That is certainly something that we could include.
Yeah. So that even though we don't have a solar bylaw, it could be part of the solar bylaw for solar projects.
Or we could just have an actual noise ordinance.
Yeah.
I would love it.
Okay, so, well, I guess that's it for now. I'm going to look at that Medway case.
Yeah, their bylaws are good, and I assume the letter from the Attorney General to the town is public.
Yeah.
So.
I think it's actually on their website now.
Okay. But yeah, so their bylaws are in place and active, and I think they're pretty good. And then the letter from the state is, as you described.
Yeah, and then there's the letter from the DPU from June 30th granting them a public utility.
And that's also on their website?
That is, but it's in a different section that I found it.
DPU letter, June 30th?
Yeah, I would look on,
websites are
I would
famously
look
well
Medway
organized.
Grid LLC DPU. It's on the state's website.
Medway Grid LLP CPU or DPU?
Yeah, check the Mass DPU website. That's where their letter is. They go into very extreme detail.
Well, great, thank you. Okay, so I guess that's it for the time being.
Okay.
Peter's almost out of paper, so I think we're done.
He's still got more in the notebook.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So, that concludes what we had listed on our agenda this evening. Does anyone else have anything wanted to say in open session? Otherwise, I'll look for a motion.
So moved.
To what?
To adjourn.
Okay. We have a motion and a second to adjourn. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you very much, everybody.